The last thing my mother said to me on Christmas night was that I couldn't do anything on my own. She said it the way someone states a weather forecast. Not cruel in its tone, just certain. The kind of certainty that doesn't leave room for argument because it doesn't expect one. I was 27 years old, standing on the front porch of the house I had lived in for the last 14 months, and the door closed behind me before I could say anything back. I had $214 in my wallet, my phone, the coat I'd been wearing at dinner, and, in the inside breast pocket of that coat, an old bank card that had belonged to my grandfather. I hadn't put it there deliberately. I'd found it 3 weeks earlier in the bottom of a shoebox while sorting through the last of his things, and I'd slipped it into that pocket meaning to deal with it later, then forgotten about it entirely. My mother had said I couldn't take anything. She'd said it with her hand already on the door. And she was technically right, I hadn't taken anything. The card had already been with me. I stood on that porch for a long moment. The neighborhood was quiet the way Christmas night always is. Every house lit and sealed from the inside, the cold pressing down on everything like a hand. Then I walked to my car, which was still in the driveway because it was registered in my name, and I sat in it until the windshield fogged over. My name is Dani Reyes. I was 27 that December, working as a paralegal at a mid-sized civil firm in Columbus, 40 minutes from Delwood, Ohio, where I'd grown up and where I'd moved back to 14 months earlier when my apartment lease ended, and I was between situations. Between a relationship that had finished and a savings account that was nearly flat, and a version of myself I hadn't figured out yet. Moving home had felt temporary. That's the word I used. Temporary. My parents, Carol and Phil Reyes, had said of course, stay as long as you need, which I later understood to mean, stay until we decide you've overstayed and we'll be the ones who decide when that is. My grandfather, Elias Reyes, had died 22 months before that Christmas. He was my father's father, though my father and he had been estranged in the quiet, long-term way of two people who never bothered to formally close a door, they just stopped walking through it. Grandpa Elias had lived alone on Sycamore Bend Road, 7 minutes from my parents' house, in a place he'd owned outright since 1987. He'd been a machinist for most of his working life. He fixed things on weekends. He drove the same truck for 19 years. When I was small, he used to let me sit in his workshop while he worked, not talking much, just the two of us in the same space, which I understood even then was its own kind of thing. He'd left a card for me. Not a card like a letter, a card like a bank card. He'd mentioned it once, casually, 3 years before he died. I opened something for you years back, he'd said. Wasn't sure what to put in it. Put some in when I could. He hadn't said how much. I'd assumed it was the kind of account that might have a few $100s in it. A gesture. Something to remember him by. I had never tried to use it. The account was in my name. He'd set it up jointly when I was a teenager and converted it fully to my name at some point, but I hadn't thought about it in years, and after he died I just let it sit somewhere in the back of my mind labeled for later. My parents had not been close to Elias. My father spoke about him in the past tense before he was actually gone. My mother referred to the Sycamore Bend house as that place and the estate process when it came as that whole situation. Whatever Grandpa Elias had been to me, he had been a complication to them. What I contributed to the household on Larch Grove Drive, my parents' house, wasn't nothing, and I knew it wasn't nothing even while I lived there. I paid a flat monthly amount for rent. Not market rate, but not symbolic either, enough to matter. I handled the grocery runs for the better part of 6 months when my mother's back was giving her trouble, which meant planning, shopping, carrying, putting away, repeating. I kept the house running in the way that women in houses often keep things running without anyone naming it. Scheduling the HVAC inspection, being home when the plumber came, tracking the expiration on the homeowner's insurance, and flagging the renewal date. I sat with my father through 2 separate late-night conversations about money stress. His job had contracted its hours, and I didn't tell anyone about those conversations because he'd asked me not to. I also kept Grandpa Elias's memory in the house, which nobody asked me to do. I had a photograph of him on the shelf in my room. I remembered his birthday. Once, at dinner, I mentioned something he'd said to me years ago. Something small, a joke about a truck part, and my father looked at his plate and my mother changed the subject. That was the texture of it. Not dramatic. Just a steady accumulation of silences where something should have been said and wasn't. I worked full days and drove 40 minutes each way and came home and contributed and tried to take up a reasonable amount of space. I told myself I was getting back on my feet. I told myself temporary still applied. I opened my laptop some nights and looked at apartment listings and then closed it again because the numbers didn't work yet, and I put it away and I went to sleep. What I didn't see, what I let myself not see, was how the accounting worked in my mother's mind. Every meal I ate at that table was a debt. Every month I stayed was a tick mark against me. Not said out loud, but present the way a low-pressure system is present before a storm. You can't point to it yet, but you feel it in your ears. The first time my mother used the word ungrateful toward me, it was about something small. I'd forgotten to pass along a phone message. She said it almost gently. "It's just a little ungrateful, Dani, honestly," and I'd apologized and let it go. But a word like that, said out loud once, has a way of expanding. It fills space. After that first time, I heard it differently when she said other things, the implication underneath, even when the word wasn't there. Christmas dinner that year was my parents and me. A turkey that was slightly dry. The good dishes, which meant the meal carried a formality that made everything slightly stiffer than it needed to be. My father poured wine. My mother had made a salad with cranberries in it. For most of the meal, things were fine. Then my mother said, while passing the rolls, "Phil, I was thinking we could use Dani's room for the exercise equipment after the first of the year." She said it to my father, not to me. I set down my fork. "I'm still in that room," I said. "Well, you've been saying you're leaving for months," she said. Her voice was pleasant, helpful sounding. "We just thought it was time to make some plans." "I haven't given you a move-out date," I said. "No," she said. "You haven't." My father looked at his plate. "Carol," he said. "Phil, she needs to hear this," my mother said, and then she turned to me. "You have been here 14 months. 14. You came home because you couldn't manage on your own, and you still can't manage on your own, and that is the truth of it." She folded her hands on the table. "This isn't working. You need to figure out your life." Something settled in my chest, not anger, not yet, just a very specific kind of stillness, the kind that comes when you understand that a conversation you thought was in the future is actually happening right now. "I pay rent," I said. "I've been contributing to this house." "You pay a little," she said. "A little rent. We feed you, we house you, I handle the insurance. I've handled every service appointment for 8 months. Dani." She said my name the way you say a word that explains everything. "You are 27 years old. You are not a guest we've been hosting. You are a grown woman who cannot stand on her own 2 feet, and it is not our job to carry you anymore." My father finally looked up. "Maybe after the new year we can." "Tonight," my mother said. She was still looking at me. "I think it would be best if you got your things and found somewhere else." I looked at her. The candles on the table were the thin taper kind, and one of them had a slight lean to it, and for some reason I noticed that with a clarity I didn't bring to anything else in the room. "Tonight is Christmas," I said. "I know what day it is, Dani. You have a car. You have a job. You are an ungrateful girl who has taken advantage of our generosity for over a year, and I am done." She stood up and carried her plate to the kitchen. The sound of her setting it in the sink was very clear in the quiet. My father said, "She just needs a minute," which was either the saddest or most dishonest sentence I'd ever heard him say. Maybe both. I went upstairs. My mother came to the doorway of my room 20 minutes later while I was trying to think about what to take, and she said I should leave things where they were. She said she'd box it up and I could arrange to collect it. She said she just needed me to go tonight. "You can't do anything on your own," she said, almost gently, from the doorway. "But you need to start." I took my coat off the hook. My wallet was in the pocket. My phone was in my hand. That's what I left with. The door closed at 11:38 p.m. I sat in the car. I turned the heat on low. At some point I looked down at my coat folded on the passenger seat. I remembered the card. I reached into the inside breast pocket and touched the edge of it with 2 fingers. Still there. The corner was worn smooth from Grandpa Elias's thumb, the gold lettering nearly gone. I set it on the dashboard. I didn't sleep much. I drove to a gas station and bought coffee from a machine and sat in the parking lot until about 4 in the morning, then I reclined the seat and closed my eyes. In the morning, I drove to 4th Street. I parked in front of Harlan Savings and Trust at 9:06 a.m. I sat in the car for 8 minutes. At 9:14 a.m. on Wednesday, December 26th, I picked up the card, put it in my hand, and walked through the front door. The branch wasn't busy. 2 tellers, a woman at a side desk, a manager's office with the blinds half open. Holiday lighting still up on the front window. The kind of quiet that early morning bank branches have, everyone slightly slower, slightly more deliberate than they'll be by noon. I walked to the first available teller, young, maybe 22, a name tag that said Brianna, and I set the card on the counter. "I'd like to check the balance on this account," I said, "and possibly access it. My grandfather set it up for me. He passed away about 2 years ago." Brianna looked at the card. She typed something. She looked at the screen. She typed something else. Then she said, "One moment," and walked to the manager's office. I watched her say something to the man inside. He was maybe 55, gray at the temples, reading glasses on a cord around his neck. He looked at his screen. Then he looked up. He came out of the office and walked toward the counter. "Ms. Reyes?" he said. "Yes. I'm David Carruth, branch manager." He didn't extend a hand. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize. Careful, controlled, but something moving underneath it. "Would you mind sitting down with me for a moment? Is something wrong with the account?" "Nothing is wrong," he said. "I'd just like to go through a few things with you." "Please." He gestured toward a small table off to the side, 2 chairs, the kind of setup banks use when the conversation is going to take longer than a counter transaction. I sat. He sat across from me. He had a folder and a printed sheet, and his reading glasses were now on his nose. "Can you verify your identity for me?" he asked. "Driver's license, if you have it." I handed it over. He looked at it, wrote something down, handed it back. "This account was opened 31 years ago," he said, "in joint names. It was converted to sole ownership in your name 11 years ago. There have been no transactions on this account in 4 years." "Okay," I said. He set the printed sheet on the table and turned it toward me. He tapped the bottom figure with 1 finger. I looked at it. The number was $4,380 in the checking portion. And then below that, Link Savings, $687,200. Something went very still in my chest. Not shock, not disbelief exactly. More like the feeling of a room becoming suddenly quiet when a sound you'd stopped hearing finally stops. "Is this right?" I asked. "It is," he said. "Your grandfather made regular deposits over the course of roughly 28 years. Not large amounts, typically, but consistent, and the savings portion was invested in low-risk instruments starting in 2003. That balance is current as of this morning." I looked at the sheet. The number didn't change. "He never told me," I said. "That's not unusual," Mr. Carruth said, carefully. "Sometimes people set things up and let them sit. Sometimes they don't want the recipient to change their behavior because of it." He paused. "There's also a secondary item tied to this account, not held here but noted in the file as connected. A property record." He reached toward the folder. He slid it toward me. Inside was a county document, a deed, original issue, with Whitmore County Recorder's Office stamped in blue across the top margin. The property was the house on Sycamore Bend Road. I reached into the folder and took out the deed. I pulled up the county recorder's app on my phone, entered the parcel number printed on the document, and watched the current record load on the screen. I turned the phone so it faced us both and set it flat on the table next to the deed. Current assessed value. Last transfer date. Owner of record. My name. Grandpa Elias had transferred the Sycamore Bend house to me 6 years before he died. He'd never mentioned it. The transfer had been recorded quietly at the county office, no ceremony, just paperwork. I looked at the deed for a long time. My mother had said I couldn't do anything on my own. What she meant was that she expected that to stay true. What she didn't know, what I hadn't known either, was that someone who understood something about quiet labor and long patience had already made sure it wouldn't be. What I owned was my next chapter, spelled out in block-printed letters on a county document, and I didn't have to say a word about it to anyone. I thanked Mr. Carruth. I took the folder. I walked out into the cold of December 26th and stood on the sidewalk for a moment outside Harlan Savings and Trust. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my father. I drove to a diner 2 blocks over and ordered eggs and coffee and sat in a window booth and ate the whole meal while the morning opened up around me. 6 months later, I was living on Sycamore Bend Road. The house had needed work. Not serious structural work, but the kind of accumulated maintenance that an older man living alone lets slip in the final years. I'd done some of it myself, with help from a neighbor of Grandpa's who knew the property and offered. I'd hired out what I couldn't manage. The house came together slowly, the way things do when you're working steadily rather than rushing. My legal fees, filing, title review, a few consultations, had come to $3,740 in total. I paid them from the checking balance without any difficulty. I still worked at the firm in Columbus. The drive was the same 40 minutes. I didn't mind it. One evening in late June, I was sitting on the back step of the Sycamore Bend house, and I had the deed out, still in the manila envelope, rubber-banded with Grandpa Elias's handwritten note tucked inside, the one he'd left with the attorney, which said only, "Dani will know what to do with it." I was holding the envelope with both hands, not reading it, just holding it. The weight of it was specific. The paper was slightly rough at the edges from being folded and unfolded over the years before it ever reached me. A text came from my mother in early May, the first contact since Christmas. It said, "Dani, I think we should talk. Things got out of hand." I read it. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I made myself a cup of tea. I didn't respond that day, or the next, or after that. There was nothing in me that moved toward answering. My father called once, in June. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered it being. I listened to it twice. I didn't call back. What I had learned, or maybe what I'd finally let myself know, was that the people who tell you that you can't do anything on your own are usually people who need you to stay that way. Grandpa Elias had understood something different. He hadn't told me what he was doing. He'd just done it, over 28 years, one deposit at a time, because he believed the future was worth preparing for even when no one was watching. If any of this reaches someone in a similar situation, someone who's been told what they can't do by the people who were supposed to know them best, I hope it helps. Share it if it does. I still have the deed in the manila envelope. It lives on the kitchen shelf now, between a cookbook and a small clay dish Grandpa Elias made in a community class sometime in the 80s, lopsided and perfect. Some nights I take the envelope down just to hold it. Not to read it. Just to feel the weight of something that was always mine.